Aloha and welcome to this fourth video on Bowfolios. This time we're going to talk about forms, form processing. And I want to start by talking about this system, Meteor Example Form React. And this includes, I don't know, a 30-minute video that goes through it. And I highly recommend that before you watch this Bowfolios video, you watch this video, because this is going to go into more detail about the basics of using forms in our systems. And it refers to this library, the uniforms library, which is a really nice library when you're using React and Bootstrap to simplify the manipulation of user data using forms, because there's a lot of things that are involved. Sometimes the data in the database is represented differently from the way that it appears on screen. Sometimes you have validation issues, and you have issues integrating form processing with a particular CSS library like Bootstrap or Ant or whatever. Uniforms deals with all that, so it's a really nice library for once you're going beyond non-trivial form manipulation. This provides a simple example of forms in Meteor using our kind of standard, design patterns. The thing that this example doesn't do, however, is show how you deal with forms when you have more than just a single collection underneath the covers. Okay, and that's the realistic situation for non-trivial applications, is you have multiple collections and you're going to want to populate a form with data that you extracted from multiple collections. And then similarly, when you submit a form, that may lead to the desire to update multiple collections on the back end. Okay, so the Bowfolios, the principal thing that I want to talk about in Bowfolios is this issue of when you have, a more complicated data model, how do you do form processing? So watch this one first so you get to, you understand the simple stuff. Then you watch this video, and it should be straightforward, right? So I've logged in. I've got Bowfolios running. I've logged in as a user. I go to the home page. Here's a form, okay? And what we're going to see is that when I submit this form, so let's say I'm going to add HPC as a user, and I could say I am a and like to play guitar and paddle outrigger canoes. Okay, so I've changed my set of I've changed my set of interests. I've changed the biographical statement, and when I click update, okay, I get success. But the thing that's important to note is that in terms of our underlying data model, I had to both update this profiles collection because I've changed my bio, and I've also had to update this collection, which relates people to the set of interests, because I've changed the set of interests that that I'd like to be associated with. And of course, if we go back to if we go to the profiles page, now you can see that, what did I add? I don't even remember. I added HPC. So now HPC is appearing as an interest that I'm associated with, and you can see I like to play guitar. Okay, so there's a simple example of the situation where I have one form, I've made a couple updates. On the back end, I need to be updating a couple of collections. Similarly with add project, you define a project, you specify the interest, you specify the participants, we go to our data model. So we're going to have a new project thing in here. We're going to have to update this to indicate the people that are associated with it. We're going to have to update this one to update the set of interests that are associated with it. So in the case of the add projects form, all right, there's actually going to be 3 collections that have to be updated when I submit this stuff. All right. So how are we going to do that? Okay. Let's start off by going to let's deal with the home page, okay? And let's just look at that code for a second so we can understand. So here's the home page here, okay? So how do we actually implement this? the first thing to note is that we are going to subscribe to a bunch of different collections whenever we hit this page. So if I go back to here and I go Propeller Manager J and I click the Meteor DevTools Evolved and go to Minimongo, now you can see that, the interest, I have my interest collection, I have the profiles collection, I have profiles interests, that's loaded. I've subscribed to these 5 publications, which means in Minimongo on the client side, I have Minimongo collections that now have a bunch of data in them, and we're ready to go. Okay? So given that, when the next thing I need to do is I need to populate the form, okay, with the set of interests that are currently defined and the set of projects that are currently defined. Okay, now note I can add projects at any time. So it's not like I can hardwire the set of projects that appear in this. I have to dynamically generate them, and of course I've got them in here. I've got them in Minimongo because I've subscribed. So this next step, okay, and then also note that the way that Uniforms works is it wants you to generate a schema that specifies each of the fields to appear in the form and what their values are. And these are, multi-select lists. Okay, so if we go up here, what happens is we're going to define a function which takes all the, an array or list of all the interests, a list of all the projects, and it's going to return a schema. Okay? And the schema is going to specify for the interests field that it's an array, and that the allowed values are all the interests, where all the interests have been taken by plucking out of the interest collection the name field. All the projects have been found by plucking out of the projects collection the name field. Notice, remember, okay, it's all coming together. Remember that the name field for interests and the name field for projects is the unique ID, okay? So we can use the name field to uniquely identify both interests and projects. And that's why this all kind of works in a, relatively simple manner. Okay, so let's go back to the home page, keep looking. So this part, we're going to get out the unique IDs of interest, the unique ID of projects. We're going to build a schema passing these lists in so that now Uniforms is going to know what are the set of interests and set of projects that can be selected. We call this bridge thing, which we always have to do to convert our simple schema object into the object that that Uniforms wants to deal with. So this bridge thing is now going to be passed in as the schema. And then we are going to find the set of projects that are currently associated with this user, okay, by going into this join collection, profile projects. We talked about this in the last video. And we're going to find all of the documents that are associated with this current user, and then we'll pluck out of that the project field. That gives us all the projects. And similarly, same thing for interest. So one-liner does a query on Minimongo, gets the results, plucks out a particular field, bam, got our projects and interests. We'll get our profile out of here. And then we now produce the model, right, which is basically an object that conforms to this schema that Uniforms can now use to pre-populate all these fields with values, because that's what we want to do on the home page. Okay, so we're going to extend the the empty object with the profile fields plus the interest and projects fields, and then we got kind of our standard stuff, container call from Bootstrap for this. But then we do our auto form. We pass in the model, which is the current data for this user. We've got our schema. On submit, we're going to do the submit thing. We'll see that in a second. And then we just got the standard kind of shenanigans to display the form in the way we want to with all the various things. Okay? Parenthetically, we'll get to this during testing. Okay, this is an ID field we're going to populate with a value that that is not hard-coded as a string, but is instead a variable that resolves to a string, and that way we can do testing. That's why you're seeing that there. All right, so now we know how we've generated our schema. We know how we've displayed the stuff. Next thing is what happens when we click submit. Okay, so how do we do the update? And the answer to that, okay, is that we're going to call this method here, okay? And the method, it's not really a method. We're going to call that function, that local function that's defined within this object here, this home function. And what this local function called submit does, it takes the data, which is basically an object having all the fields that we want to deal with, and now it's going to do a Meteor method call. Okay, so Meteor methods are a way. There's two things that are great about Meteor methods. One is that in this case, we have some data. And we want to ask the server, or we want to ask the system in some sense, I'd like to make this update. Is that okay? All right. And so what a Meteor method does is like a remote procedure call. It's going to take that data, okay, and then we're going to specify the name of the method to actually call. And that method will be called, the data will be sent over to the server, and then the method will be called, and the method on the server side decides, okay, do I want to do this or not? Is this person authorized to do this? Is the data valid? You can do whatever kinds of processing and validation stuff that it wants before it updates it. And convenient, what's really nice for us is that it can do a bunch of different operations on the backend database. Maybe gets errors, maybe doesn't. And then on this side, we find out at the end, was there an error? Was there not? If there was, we tell, we communicate the error that's passed back to us from the server side. Otherwise, we just say, yeah, worked fine. Okay? So Meteor methods, even though there's a small amount of syntax that you've got to understand in order to use them, are extremely, powerful. They increase security. But more importantly, they make the code smaller and simpler. But in this case, in particular, when you've got to update multiple collections. And the reason for that is that when you're using the insecure method, which is what we use in Meteor Meteor application template React, we use the insecure method. So we, in that simple thing where we're updating the stuffs collection, we just invoke insert on the stuffs collection on mini Mongo, and that gets propagated to the server. The problem with that, when you scale up to multiple database manipulations, is that you have to do the first database manipulation, provide a callback that invokes the second database manipulation after the first succeeds. It itself needs to have a callback to call the third one. You can Google this term, callback hell. Callback hell is a characteristic of certain JavaScript frameworks where it's very painful to do multiple things in a sequential way when there's some asynchronous processing involved. Okay, Meteor methods is a convenient way to completely eliminate that. We're just updating this, calling this one thing. We have one callback that deals with error processing, and no matter how complicated it is, the thing that we have to do, we still just have one callback. Okay, so the question is, how do you do this Meteor method? Well, what happens is, if we go into the startup both, because this is, methods are something that straddle both client and server, right? On the client side, we have to call them, okay? And on the server side, we have to actually run them. So that's why in the startup package, some stuff is client specific, some stuff is server specific, but methods are something that both the client and the server needs to know about, so they're actually loaded on both sides. So if we look in this file, what we can see is we define a string, which I believe is the string. Nope, that's not what I want to do. I want to do this one. Okay, so update profile method, propeller B, okay, that goes to here. So basically we just want to have a way of exporting the string to this field and not typing the string in there, because what happens, if we don't type it correctly, that's a problem. So this is kind of a simple way to make sure we don't make a typo when we're actually typing out this string. And it's going to involve this method here. And for syntactic reasons, unfortunately, I do have to make a copy of that string there, but I, looked very carefully to make sure it's the same string. And this syntax is a little, how can I say this? It's a little strange looking. It doesn't really look like you're defining a function. So you kind of what you want to do is you kind of want to cut and paste an existing Meteor method declaration and then just edit the fields. Because if you just look in here, okay, and you pretend that this is the name of the function, okay, and then you've got the argument list right here, and the argument list needs to consist of an object where we can have destructuring references, and then you've got, a block, curly braces, and you've got all this code inside, okay? So just think of it like, okay, here's my function definition, or my Meteor method function definition, and it's going to take these arguments, and it's got this name, which can be used on the client side to make sure that this is the one invoked, and then inside, go to town, do whatever you want to do. There's more there's stuff here that you can read through, talk a little bit about it. There's tutorials on Meteor methods and so forth, which are worth doing, but frankly, if you have these examples and you understand these examples, you really should be good to go, because there's not much more to it than this kind of strange syntax for declaring them, and then beyond that, you just write JavaScript code inside. In this case, what the JavaScript code is going to do is we're going to update the profiles collection, and we're just going to set all of the fields associated with the profile, okay? And remember, email is the unique ID for the profiles collection, and so we know if we search for the email, we're going to get exactly one document back, and then we just set everything. We don't know which of these got updated, so we just reset all of them, because either they're the same as they were before, or I made a modification to it, but we'll just reset them. Then it might have been the case that I updated the interest in the projects, and if you remember in that example, I did update interest and not projects, but rather than kind of trying to figure out what it is that the user did, my approach, because I like being simple, is like, well, the fastest thing to do is I will simply, I know what the target set of interests are, at the end of the day. I know the target set of projects for the user at the end of the day. I don't know whether these are different than they used to be or not, but I know what they should be now. So the simplest way for me to deal with that is I'm going to remove all the interests from the profiles interest collection. I'm going to remove all the projects associated with this user from the profiles projects collection, and then I'm just going to go back through and insert the current one. So a lot of the times, there's extra work involved here, because they didn't update the interests, but I'm removing them and reinserting them. And if you find that there is a performance overhead that's unacceptable associated with this approach, then you should take the time to figure out before you call the method, hey, are there actually projects that need to be associated? You can do all that on the client side, obviously. You can find out whether they've changed any projects and only send over the data that needs to be updated. That's certainly a good thing to do. In this particular case, the performance overhead is negligible, okay? Because updates don't happen a lot, and there's not a lot of data involved. So this is much simpler code, less lines of code, guaranteed to work right, does a little extra work. See, this isn't a device driver for a Unix disk drive or something. So there you have it. There's the Meteor method. That's how, and so, okay, what we see here is we have a single call that's going to update multiple collections. All right, actually, all of these lines of code are manipulating the background collections, and we could do all sorts of other kinds of manipulations in here. If there was some issue with the bio, we wanted to check that the bio didn't include swear words or something. I don't, whatever. You can do anything you want here, and you can throw an error, a JavaScript error, which would be communicated back to the client. All of these Mongo calls, can produce errors under certain circumstances. If so, whenever it happens, the error will be caught by Meteor. It'll be passed back to the client, displayed. You could put a try catch in here if you wanted to handle the errors yourself and provide something more interesting back to the user. All sorts of stuff you can do. All right, so that is that I think is enough for you to understand how the home page works, right? So we're going to call that update profile method with the data. We're going to update all the data on the client side. We're going to update all the data in the server. By the way, that will result in the subscriptions changing. That will result in the database changing, which means that these subscriptions are going to repopulate with new data, which means the page is going to be redisplayed, which means we're going to see, the updated version of the state. Okay. The other page is add project, and I'll just display it to say so that you can see that it's really basically the same kind of thing. We've got make schema because we need to know what are the current interests, what are the current participants, so that we can populate that list, multi-select list appropriately. We have the add project. This time we're going to call the add project method. We control B. Turns out it's this one, which is here. And it's really just kind of the same thing. Turns out that at least one interest is required for reasons that aren't that interesting, other than to show you how you can make sure that something's required. Yeah, there you have it. Okay. Forms in Bowfolios. It's a good thing. Enjoy.